Hi, and welcome to my live reading of my latest novel called SoulBreather. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction. This is the book, and it is rather gorgeous in hardback and is just releasing today on January 23rd, 2023 in ebook. So, just to give you a quick peek inside, it is a rather special book, and it's the first book that I've written outside of my epic fantasy Sentinel series. The first book of that, which was Sentinels Awaken, I published 2 years ago in October 2020. So, this is my first book in a new series outside of the Sentinel series, which is also quite exciting. And today is the release of it as an ebook. The Soul Breather launched originally as part of the Realm of Darkness anthology, which was a USA Today bestselling anthology, which was so exciting. But now the anthology is delisted. You can get the book separately if you so desire. So now it's available as paperback, hardback, and ebook. So, what is SoulBreather? So, SoulBreather is a fantasy romance book. And if you like wounded heroes, feisty heroines, a slow burn romance, there's much more of a romance subplot or a romance plot to this book than there is in my epic fantasy series. Forced proximity and found family, then you'll love SoulBreather. And I'm going to read a chapter from SoulBreather. And don't you just love the cover? The colors are just so vibrant. I just think it's beautiful. So I'm very excited to be reading a chapter of this for you today. And if you have any comments or questions, then please do put them in the chat line, and I'd be happy to answer them, even after the recording is finished. And if you see this at a later date and you want to ask questions or find out more, then please do let me know. So you can find me on most social media outlets. I'm most active on Instagram, so you'll probably find me there more than anywhere else. My handle is at Helen Garraway Author. And I also have a website, which is www.helengarraway.com, where you can contact me and find all the details of all my books, because the Sentinel series is 5 books now. Sentinels Banished, the 5th book, releases next month, which is also very exciting. But today we're here to talk about SoulBreather. So I'm going to read you a chapter, and then hopefully you'll be tempted. So this is this is a little way in. So to begin with, you're obviously introduced to my two main characters, who are Solange, who's a mortal, and Mav, who is a fallen angel. And Mav has found himself stranded in Eidolon, the land for the soulless. So once you lose your soul, you get banished to Eidolon and you can't return. You can only live in Peronia, which is the sunny side of the world, if you have a soul. So Solange lives in Peronia. Mav used to, but he's now been banished to Eidolon, and he's trying to figure out how to get back and how to prove that he didn't do what they're accusing him of. So Solange has helped him, and they're traveling together, trying to get back to Peronia. Well, Mav's not sure whether he ought to go back yet or not, but that's where they're traveling. So anyway, they're on the road, traveling back to the Divide. Mav shifted in his saddle for what felt like the 100th time. His knee throbbed, the swelling tight against the material of his stolen trousers. Why he was annoyed at wearing someone else's clothes when everything else they had was stolen, he didn't know. Maybe his heritage was peeking through the years of strife and secrecy. He was supposed to be the one helping others, not taking from them, though he didn't regret stealing from Julius or that seraphim at all. He frowned in thought. Who had it been? They had never let him see anyone's face, and he hadn't recognized the voice. Though after so many years away from the citadel, that wasn't surprising. But that voice was now ingrained in his memory. He'd know when he met the seraphim again. That seraphim was his link to the citadel. Once more, he tried to piece together how he had fallen into his clutches. Memories of his arrival in Eidolon were blurry. He didn't actually remember arriving. He just woke up one day, off-kilter and confused. Fortunate to be taken up by a passing farmer and his wife. They had eyed him closely and then given him a knowing smile. Just arrived, they'd asked, and he had nodded, and then grabbed his head as the piercing pain threatened to split his skull in two. Apparently, there was a certain look that a newly arrived soulless person had. Mav had come to the conclusion that it was an "I've been bludgeoned and dumped" look, because that was how it felt. He had much to thank that couple for, giving him shelter while he recovered from his injuries, time to reorient himself in Idlen, and a chance to wonder how he had ended up there. Living a lie, he had pretended to be a drifter, moving from one farmstead to the next as the whim took him, trying to stay out of trouble, though trouble had often found him. He seemed to be a magnet for it. He seemed to attract it as if he had a sign on his forehead saying, "Fallen angel here, come and take your best shot while he's down." It was getting to the point where he no longer knew what was real and what was rumour. He thought he had successfully submerged himself into life in Idlen, accepted that he could never return to Angelicus and that his family didn't want him. Well, if he was being honest, he hadn't accepted it as such, but had grasped the opportunity that Idlen offered to survive, with the desperate grip of a drowning man, clinging on to anything that might keep him afloat. A memory stirred out of the horror of the torture chamber. Mav clamped down on the visceral flash of fear that flushed through him and focused on the words Kayanera had said. Trying to divorce himself from the memory of the pain, he gritted his teeth and concentrated. Sweat dewed his skin as he hunted down their conversation, his stomach clenching no matter how hard he tried to ignore his racing heart. According to Kayanera, he had strayed where he was not wanted. What had he found that they didn't want him to know, and who had he stumbled across? He lifted his head and stared around him, blinking away the musings and letting the memories go as he exhaled, trying to relax tense muscles. They were travelling through the vales of Idlen. Grim and dreary, the grassy slopes were wreathed in layers of mist, leaching all colour and deadening the sound of the calliope's hooves. They hid surprisingly warm and welcoming homesteads. There were a few distant lights of isolated farms or small hamlets. In Idlen, people grouped together in villages and towns for safety. It was a shame people didn't look past the heavy clouds and uninviting outlook. The people of Idlen had learned to laugh and enjoy life, even if a new path had been forced on them. He glanced at Solange, hunched in her woolen cloak as if the mist squashed her in the saddle. Straightening, he searched their surroundings. The light was unchanging, the mists thickening. It was time to stop for the night. The calopes needed to rest, as did they. Peering at the winter-worn boughs of the trees looming overhead, he led the way into their damp embrace. Straggly branches sprung into their faces as they passed, leaving wet scratches and droplets of water in their hair. Mav glanced around the small clearing. "We'll stop here for the night." "Is it night?" "The sky doesn't change. There's no sun, no moon, just this depressing mist." "We're too far north. The sun doesn't rise here. It'll get lighter as we travel south." Solange shivered, tugging her cloak around her as she slid out of her saddle. She stretched her legs. "I hope so. I couldn't live in twilight all my life." "It's not so bad. You get used to it." "I prefer living in the sun all the time. Seems less threatening." Mav grimaced. Just because it was light and sunny didn't make it any less corrupt. He gritted his teeth and slowly slid out of the saddle, balancing on his good leg. Heat flushed through him, chasing away the chill, but leaving his skin damp with sweat. He left Solange to set up camp as he struggled with the saddles. He rested his forehead against the animal's flank and inhaled the comforting aroma of its musky coat. Once his tense shoulders relaxed, he limped towards the small fire she had lit. "So what can we expect to attack us out here if everyone is afraid of leaving their homes?" she asked, poking a damp stick in her fire. The stick hissed and popped in protest. "Whatever, or whoever thinks they are stronger than you." "Do you ever give a straight answer?" Mav raised his eyebrows at her. The firelight burnished her brown skin to a warm copper, and her black eyes gleamed with twin pools of flames as she glared at him. "I thought I had." "It tells me nothing. Are there large beasts, bandits, rampant angels?" "Angels rarely rampage, though I suppose there is always a chance," he mused. "They wouldn't bother this far north. Too far to go home after they'd finished." "You're thinking of the host. They're the soldiers, though you don't want to offend the cherubim either. They are like a one-person army, and don't underestimate the cherubs. They may be small, but they are sneaky little buggers, catch you out every time." He blew his breath out as he tried to remember the last time he had seen a cherub. His eyes stung and his vision blurred, and he wiped his face, mildly surprised to see that he was sweating. Solange suddenly lurched to her feet, and the next moment her palm was against his forehead. I knew it. You're burning up. Why didn't you say you had a fever? I don't suffer from fevers. Well, you do now. Your cheeks are flushed and your skin is scorching, and you are talking nonsense. Here, drink. She shoved a water skin at him as she hunted in the saddlebags. Mav suddenly realized he was parched. You need to eat something. Mav ignored her outstretched hand. The smell of the dried meat made his stomach turn. No, thank you. I'm fine. I'm not hungry. Her eyes narrowed, and then ran down his body to his swollen knee, straining against the material. I thought you said you healed it. I said I did what I could. There is nothing you can do, so there's no point worrying about it. I'll be fine. Struggling to stay still under her searching inspection, Mav relaxed as she exhaled and sat back down. All right. Tell me how you ended up in that torture chamber, Solange asked. I've been trying to figure that out myself. A bit like you, I was in one place one moment and then awoke in chains. Do you know how long you were there? Mav was surprised to see concern in her expression. Why did she care? No, and I'd rather not talk about what happened there, if you don't mind. He couldn't suppress the shudder, and Solange nodded, keeping her eyes on him. Who are you, then? An angel? The seraphim said you had wings. You must be an angel. Mav released a sigh of breath. I was once. I'm fallen, cast out, almost forgotten, but not quite, it seems. What did you do? It's been so long, I'm not sure I remember anymore. Whatever I did has been embellished out of all recognition over time, so I try not to bring it up, else they'll kill me before I draw breath. He hugged his uninjured knee to his chest and closed his eyes as he rested his aching head against the tree trunk behind him. There was no doubt about it. He was desperate, about to exhale his last breath. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to return to the citadel before it was too late. He would report what he'd found out about the exploitation of the people in Eidolon, the desperate circumstances many people lived in, and then leave, if that was what they wanted. That was as if they even let him enter and speak. He rubbed his temple, trying to ease the ache. The thoughts rushed through his brain in an uncontrolled burst. One last attempt. One last throw of life's destiny. No matter how the dice fell, he would not be accused of giving up. What was left of him would go down blazing. That he promised. Where were you when they caught you? Is that where we're going? He rolled his head and squinted at her. His eyes hurt and his head ached. You said you crossed at the divide. I assumed you were from Peronia and would want to go home. I live in the city of Peronia, but that's not where I'm from, she corrected him. The divide is a 3-week ride south. You can cross back into Peronia there. What about you? Where are you going? Haven't decided yet. He had 3 weeks to make that decision. It seemed like too much effort at this precise point in time. Where are you from, if not Peronia? He asked, closing his eyes again. Originally, after a brief hesitation, Solange continued. Buratra, down on the south coast. That's where my family lives. It's beautiful. Blue seas, golden sands. My father and my eldest brother were fishermen. They always come home with full nets. Kept my mother and I busy. Mav dozed, listening as her voice wrapped him in a warm hug, and sheltered by her caressing cadences, he fell asleep. Solange stopped talking when she heard him snore. Just a tiny one, but she knew he was asleep. Relief that she could stop talking about her family rushed through her. She had managed to avoid mentioning her younger brother, but it had brought all of her fears back to the fore. Was Bren all right? Were they keeping him in prison, or had they let him go? Somehow she didn't think Kirill would be benevolent. He wouldn't release her brother until she brought Mav to him in Peronia. Just the thought of handing Mav back over to such a monster curdled her stomach. But what was she to do? That was the only way she could save her brother. She wet a cloth and placed it on Mav's forehead. She almost expected it to sizzle, he was so hot. The heat radiating off his knee told her that nothing good was happening there, but she had no idea how to help him. His face was strained and tinged with grey, and he had eaten nothing all day. She should have noticed earlier that he was suffering and made him stop. His shadows curled around him, and she reached, her fingers caressing them. They froze for a moment, and then swirled around her fingers, cool and smooth, and inherently Mav. They were of him, part of him, just as a soul was. Was it his soul? Was it what left of his soul, maybe? No, surely not. The shadows were tentative to begin with, keeping her away from him, but as she promised she wouldn't hurt him, they curled around her. Dark as the night, they absorbed all light, coaxing her SoulMist closer. Her fingers tingled as the silvery sparkles nipped at her skin. What were they? They pushed her away as she searched the shadows, trying to understand what they were. Souls were normally golden swirls of light. They trailed after most people, humans and angels alike, golden veils of vibrant light that she could thread her fingers through and cuddle and embrace and excite, and use to bring her lovers to screaming climaxes that wiped all thought of memory or memory of how they got there out of their brains. Well, until she had nearly killed someone and learned that it was best not to touch. They also gave her glimpses of the person's uppermost thoughts. But not these shadows. They revealed nothing of Mav's thoughts or memories. No matter how much she probed, they told her nothing, and she was relieved. She didn't want to steal his memories, even if Kirill was forcing her to. She would make them up. Kirill would never know. Mav's shadows were strong and dark, and they felt divine, like plush fur or the softest wrap. She couldn't resist them, and ignoring her self-imposed rule not to touch, she leaned into them, embraced them, became one with them, exulted in the feel of the entwining with her soul light. They behaved like souls, and they reciprocated. Oh my, did they reciprocate? A sharp crack made her jerk, her head nearly twisting off her neck, she turned so fast, and she swayed, feeling light-headed and giddy. She stilled, her heart racing as Mav gripped her wrist, and she met his amber eyes, which were soft and luminous. She gulped. She had forgotten the effects she could leave behind. If she felt languorous and decadent, what did he feel? He rose swiftly, more in control of his emotions than she was, and he pushed her behind him as he surveyed their camp. His sword was already in his hand, and Solange fumbled for her dagger. "What is it?" she whispered. The thick bushes on the other side of the clearing shook, and a large beast emerged from its embrace and paused at the edge of their camp. Its huge eyes luminesced in the firelight, high in an elongated face. Shaggy fur and stripes of different shades of brown covered its body. Long limbs were tipped in vicious-looking claws. Solange hissed her breath out as Mav lowered his sword and moved towards the fire. "Mav," she breathed in warning. "Not everything in Eidolon is dangerous," Mav replied. He stooped to pick up a saddlebag, and after a moment of rummaging, dropped it back on the ground. He approached the beast, holding out his hand. The animal waffled, sniffled the air, and then shambled forward, and a large tongue licked Mav's hand and scooped up whatever he held. Solange watched in shock as Mav scratched the creature behind the ear. She flinched as a deep rumble echoed across their camp, and then realized it was purring. Mav grinned at her, which eased the strain on his face, and he beckoned her over. "This is a Demora." "A what?" "A Demora, a creature of the night. They can only see in the dark. They bumble around in the day, so they don't often venture out of their caves. This far north, it's not such a problem, but further south, you won't see them. I've always said this is where the word demon came from, but these are just big softies, nothing like a demon. Aren't you, fella?" he asked as he scratched the Demora's chin. The rumble deepened to a vibration, and Solange laughed. The Demora was huge. Mav barely came up to its shoulder, but he stood next to the gaping maw as if it meant nothing, which, from the way the creature was reacting, it didn't. Mav gave the beast a hug and then pushed at his shoulder. "Off you go. Not all camps will be as welcoming, so you be careful. Avoid the man people." The Demora grunted, dipped his head at Mav, and then shambled off. "Did you just talk to him, and he understood you?" Mav glanced at her in surprise. "Of course. All beasts can understand you." Solange shook her head. "No, I'm pretty sure animals don't usually understand a word you say." "Ah, but you're in Eidolon now, and the creatures of Eidolon are not the same as elsewhere. They are much more intelligent." "But how? Shouldn't the creatures in Peronia, those under the aegis of angels, be more intelligent?" Mav's eyebrows rose. "Why?" "Well, because they are angels, they know best, and it's brighter, warmer, more inclusive." "Is it?" "Yes, here it's dreary, miserable, and oppressive." Mav considered her. "I suppose you've only seen the castle and the local scenery. Not being in the sun's glare all the time gives others the chance to shine." "You know," he said, waving a hand, "Demoras are peaceful creatures, grazers. They may look vicious with those claws, but they are for stripping bark or digging up fungi or roots. The ground is often frozen up here in the north. Without their claws, they would starve. Mav sheathed his sword and limped back to his bedroll. You can't always judge things by what you see. You have other senses as well, you know. Get some sleep. We have an early start. He rolled up in his blanket and closed his eyes, leaving Solange staring at him in shock. How do you know all this? She demanded. But he didn't answer, and with some angst she covered herself with a blanket and glared at him. Mav's lips twitched as if aware of her glare. You know, you could continue doing whatever it was you were doing before we were so rudely interrupted. Solange gasped as heat rose across her face. He had known. His grin widened, and she huffed and turned her back on him. She wasn't sure why she was angry at him. It wasn't as if he had done anything wrong. She heaved a deep sigh and rolled back over, snuggling into her blanket, her gaze resting on him. It was reassuring seeing him lying there. She fell asleep, remembering the caress of his shadows, a slight smile on her face. There we go. And that's a chapter from SoulBreather. I hope you enjoy reading the book, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me reading a chapter, and I hope you're tempted to buy a copy. So, book 1, SoulBreather. I've just finished writing book 2, so it's on to editing. So book 2 will not be long, and it'll certainly be releasing this year. And I look forward to doing a live reading of that book when we get there. I have another book launching next month, February 23rd, 2023. And that is Sentinels Banished, which is the 5th book of the Sentinel series. And I'll do a live reading of Sentinels Banished nearer the time. But yes, so that's the 5th book in the Epic Fantasy Sentinel series. And it's I'm quite amazed that I'm now releasing book number 5, which is pretty wonderful. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining me to listen to a live reading of SoulBreather. And I hope you enjoy the books. Thank you.